So, coronavirus is the punishment from God. That's the question my wife is asking her friends. Indeed, we've got a house group on the subject. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know. Is it? I mean, do you blame people for things? Do you blame the Chinese for coronavirus? It's a thought and a half. It's politically incorrect, isn't it, to blame the Chinese? Donald Trump does it, blame the Chinese. It's his excuse for his incompetence in dealing with this whole coronavirus crisis. On the other hand, the Prime Minister of Britain's in love with the Chinese. And he's equally, I mean, there are three world leaders that have been utterly incompetent in dealing with coronavirus. One is Donald Trump, one is Boris Johnson, and one is that chap from Brazil. What's his name? Bolsonaro, is it? I mean, atrocious. The complete failure of these leaders to deal with this disastrous consequences of this virus. In my view, well, okay, I mean, my view is very subjective, but it's politically incorrect to blame the Chinese nonetheless. I mean, everything goes on. It's very much a blinkered view as to what is politically incorrect, what is not politically incorrect. It depends on the fashions of the time and the moment. I just watched last night a comic on BBC One, was it? Yeah, BBC One, called Jason Manford, and he was obscenely racist, in my view. At this time when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, BBC puts on Jason Manford, who has a go at all things politically correct, and in the process compares Somali pirates to Cornish pirates, and I thought made the most vile little joke about the whole business, talking about the accent of Somali pirates as opposed to the accent of Cornish pirates. The whole audience thought it was funny. The whole audience were British mainstream people. I thought it was disgusting, racist, and yet he's on mainstream television. What's perceived as acceptable in these days, it's he can get away with it because he's a comedian. You can get away with things like that? I don't think so. And yet it's politically incorrect. The same people who are laughing at Jason Manford would find it obscene if I suggested that it was China's fault that coronavirus was with us because of China's incompetence dealing with its live meat market, or possibly because of China's Institute of Virology. Double standards. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Can you blame people? Should you blame people? I blame China for the imprisonment of the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs, 1 million people in concentration camps, 1 million Muslims in concentration camps, and yet the Arab world doesn't care. I stray from the basic point of this discussion. Do you blame God for coronavirus? Never mind China. Do you blame God for coronavirus? Never mind blaming Boris Johnson and Donald Trump for their incompetent handling of the whole thing. So, is God to blame for coronavirus? My friend Lizzie Witz, now she says, she quotes Psalm 106 as something to think about. Verse 29. Thus they provoked him to anger with their deeds, and the plague broke out among them. Then Phinehas stood up and intervened, and the plague was stopped. That's a reference to God getting angry with the children of Israel because they worshipped other gods, and he killed 25,000 of them. And there were a small number. He killed 25,000 of them with plague. And then Phinehas made a kind of blood sacrifice. Some Israelite was committing adultery. Phinehas was allegedly black, curiously. Black Lives Matter. But anyway, he caught this Israelite committing adultery with a woman from another tribe, and he just slew them with a spear that went through one and through the other. Anyway, so this act of great virtue meant that the plague ended. What a God that was, eh? God expects a blood sacrifice, and then he ends the slaughter of the innocents. Well, they weren't innocent, were they? And are we innocent? Is God... is this retribution for our misdeeds? I mean, have we sinned? So is this punishment? You look at what we're doing to Mother Earth, you might think it was. And certainly coronavirus gives Mother Earth a respite. So maybe it is God's punishment. But really, Is that the kind of God you believe in? A God that would do that? And yet God has stood by and watched the Holocaust, hasn't he? I mean, there is an argument, according to Mullah Sadr, the great Islamic philosopher, and I've said this before in these podcasts, but it is something that touches my heart. The idea that it is essential that free will is given to all of creation, not just mankind. You don't set man apart. So everything from the volcano to the virus has free will. And that's very Pauline, of course, in Christian terms. The idea that creation aches and groans, waiting for salvation, that the whole of existence is alive. And yes, there's a beauty in that. But you think that lets God off the hook? God still has responsibility for his children, and where is he? What is he doing while people are dying? In Brazil, now it's over 40,000. Goodness knows Britain is similar, and the United States is off the scale. Yet in real terms of the numbers that have been killed, perhaps Britain is one of the worst in the world. Of course, Spain and Italy had it bad in the early days, but then it was the early days. They got it first, and they didn't have the experience, and they went into lockdown. But Britain truly messed up. And I wonder about these demonstrations. Yes, Black Lives Matter, but do they matter to the extent that you endanger your family members by going out? And do they matter so much that it excuses you going on a demonstration in which you make your family members vulnerable by mixing on the scale that people are mixing in these demonstrations? Look at America, where the deaths are colossal amongst the black community, and Britain, where the deaths are colossal amongst the black community. That is the most vulnerable community of all. I think there's a lot of injustice in the way we've handled coronavirus. The black and ethnic minority communities in sophisticated Western countries are those worst affected. And yet, we're making a greater subclass. We're supporting, for example, in Britain, the money that's being poured into supporting those in employment, those with jobs who are being allowed to keep their jobs even though they're not working. Their salaries are being subsidized in the UK. And that's an amazing thing, but it's on the backs of it's going to be paid for ultimately. So we are fat cats sitting on the backs of future generations. Our children and our children's children will pay for the luxury of us being allowed to sit at home and not work. And it is a huge, huge luxury we're giving ourselves at the cost of our children. So yes, this money we're spending on will be paid back eventually. And yes, it's an immense burden. Britain alone, the economy has crashed by 20%. 20%? It must be massively more than that. I don't trust these figures. Anyway, the point is that you can trust no one. Can you trust God? God's responsible for what he's done? Wow. God's responsible for what we've done? You blame us? Okay, then we're being punished. You believe in a God that punishes his children? I believe in God, absolutely. There is no question in my mind that there's a God. For me, it's facile to think that the whole of creation comes from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. But do you trust this God who does this to you? Who allows this to be done to you, allows people to die? Of course, God doesn't believe in death, does he? He believes in eternal life. He sees it's all going on forever. Nonetheless, there's a lot of suffering involved in the deaths involved with coronavirus. A God that stands by and watches people suffer like this, that punishes his children in this way, and punishes the most vulnerable? Is this the kind of God that we can respect and honor? Muslims talk about God Ar-Rahim. I believe that's how you say it. Ar-Rahim, yes, of course it is. God the merciful, Rahman, the merciful. Is this a merciful God? Surely not. God has a lot to answer for. How dare God turn his back on his children at this time? No, it's not right. It is not right, God. Absolutely improper. We may sin, we may fail, but you have no right to fail us. We are your children and you have a responsibility for us. Wouldn't you say? I think we need some strong prayer instead of the weak, wimpy prayer we've had. I am astonished by some of the church leaders. I heard a sermon at our old church, St. Stephen's, which still does Zoom church services, which thank God they do. I really love them. But the preacher was saying, well, it's a moment to suffer alongside Jesus. Oh, for goodness sake, it was a lady preacher. What's in her head? It's a moment to suffer alongside Jesus? It's a moment to ask a lot of questions, that's for sure. Is this a punishment from God? And do you believe in the kind of God that punishes his people? I don't know. I turned this morning to Psalm 62. I'm not sure it's the psalm that the famous hymn song comes from, but it reminded me of the "We Shall Not Be Moved" song. I think that actually comes from a different psalm, but my soul waits silently for God alone, for my expectation is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. In God is my salvation and my glory. The rock of my strength and my refuge is in God. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. We shall not be moved. You know the song. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that stands by the water's side. We shall not be moved. Great song. Pete Seeger sang it amongst others. We shall not be moved. It was the protest song of my generation of the 60s. We shall not be moved. Trust God at all times. Yes, okay, trust God. But it also says, pour out your heart before him. I think we need to pour out our hearts before God and shout and stand in the breach for the land and really make our voice heard, because this is not right. This is not right. And it's time for it to end. And God is responsible. He is our Father, Mother God. He is responsible for everything that happens. Tabit al-Kul, the controller of all things, says the Coptic Creed. Yeah, well, Tabit al-Kul, it's your responsibility. Get on with it, deal with it, and help us to help ourselves, I would say. Enough of this punishment for the world we live in. We need a new chance now. So, God bless you one and all. That's what I wanted to share with you this day. And let's all pray that this particular plague is coming to an end.